The morning sun hadn't yet broken through the dense fog when David Rodriguez stepped out of his cramped apartment, the worn soles of his shoes already anticipating the long journey ahead. He adjusted his faded uniform shirt, the name tag slightly crooked, and began what had become his daily ritual for the past 8 months, a 7-mile walk to the industrial complex where he worked the night shift as a maintenance supervisor. What David didn't know was that behind the tinted windows of a sleek black sedan parked strategically across the street sat Victoria Chen, the CEO of Meridian Industries. She had been following this routine for 3 weeks now, ever since her head of security mentioned something unusual about one of their employees. Something that made her question everything she thought she knew about dedication, sacrifice, and the true meaning of wealth. But to understand how the most powerful woman in the city came to spend her mornings tracking a maintenance worker's daily commute, we need to go back to where it all started, to a moment that would challenge everything Victoria believed about success and the people who work in the shadows to make it possible. 3 months earlier, Victoria had implemented what she called Operation Ground Truth, a personal mission to understand her company from the bottom up. Unknown to her executive team, she had begun making unannounced visits to different departments, sometimes disguising herself as a consultant or inspector. It was during one of these visits to the night maintenance department that she first encountered David Rodriguez. She had been walking through the facility at 2 in the morning, clipboard in hand, when she heard the sound of someone singing softly in Spanish. Following the melody, she discovered David meticulously cleaning the executive conference room, his voice carrying a haunting beauty that seemed to transform the sterile corporate space into something sacred. When he noticed her, he immediately stopped singing and apologized, thinking he had disturbed someone important. "Please, don't stop," Victoria had said, though she was supposed to be playing the role of a quality inspector. "It's beautiful." David had smiled shyly and explained that music helped him focus during the long nights. He mentioned that he used to perform in local venues, but had given it up when his wife passed away 2 years ago, leaving him to care for their 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, alone. The medical bills from his wife's battle with cancer had consumed their savings, and the music, along with many other dreams, had become a luxury he could no longer afford. What struck Victoria wasn't just his story, but the way he spoke about his work. David took genuine pride in every surface he cleaned, every repair he made. He knew the names of the security guards, remembered when the cleaning lady's grandson was sick, and somehow managed to maintain an optimism that seemed to defy his circumstances. When Victoria asked him how he got to work, David had mentioned that his car had broken down months ago, but he was grateful the job was only 7 miles away. Walking gave him time to think, he said, and the early morning air reminded him of the walks he used to take with his wife. That conversation haunted Victoria for weeks. Here was a man who had lost everything: his wife, his financial security, his transportation. Yet he showed up every night, walked 14 miles round trip, and brought more dignity and pride to his work than executives who earned 50 times his salary. The revelation became personal when Victoria's own daughter, Emma, home from boarding school for a weekend visit, complained bitterly about having to take a taxi to her friend's house because their driver was sick. The contrast between Emma's attitude and David's gratitude was so stark that Victoria found herself unable to sleep that night. She realized she had raised a daughter who viewed basic transportation as an entitlement, while one of her most dedicated employees was literally walking miles just for the privilege of working. That's when Victoria decided to follow David's morning routine. She wanted to understand what 7 miles meant to a man carrying the weight of single parenthood and financial desperation. What she discovered was a journey that revealed more about character and determination than any business school case study ever could. David's route took him through 4 distinct neighborhoods, each telling a different part of his story. He started in the run-down apartment complex where he lived with Sophie, the walls so thin that Victoria could hear children crying and televisions blaring even from her car. She watched as David locked multiple deadbolts, his movements quick and efficient, the actions of someone who understood that security was a luxury he had to create for himself. The first mile took him through what locals called the Forgotten District, a stretch of abandoned buildings and vacant lots where the city's promises of revitalization had never materialized. Victoria watched as David kept his head up, his pace steady, acknowledging the few other early risers with respectful nods. When a stray dog began following him, David shared half of what appeared to be his only breakfast, a piece of toast wrapped in a napkin. By the second mile, they entered a slightly better neighborhood, where David's routine included checking on Mrs. Garcia, an elderly widow who lived alone. Victoria watched from a distance as David spent 5 minutes ensuring the woman was safe, helping her retrieve her morning newspaper from the bushes where the delivery boy had thrown it. Mrs. Garcia tried to offer him coffee, but David politely declined, pointing to his watch. Even in his act of kindness, he was conscious of not being late for work. The third and fourth miles took them through a commercial district that was just beginning to stir with morning activity. Here, Victoria witnessed something that would later change everything. David stopped at a small diner where the owner, a gruff man named Pete, was struggling to move heavy boxes of supplies. Without being asked, David spent 15 minutes helping with the delivery, refusing Pete's offer of a free breakfast with the same gentle smile he'd given Mrs. Garcia. "Can't today, Pete, but thanks. Gotta keep moving," David had said, and Victoria could see in Pete's expression a deep respect for this man who helped without expectation of reward. Miles 5 and 6 wound through an industrial area where David's story took another emotional turn. Victoria watched as he stopped at a small memorial garden tucked between 2 factories, a place where workers had created a tribute to colleagues lost in workplace accidents. David spent several minutes there, and Victoria realized he was talking to someone who couldn't answer back. Later, through careful inquiries, she would learn that this was where David came to speak with his wife, Maria, telling her about Sophie's progress in school, his worries about their finances, and his hope that he was making her proud. The final mile was perhaps the most revealing. As they approached Meridian Industries, David's pace changed. His shoulders straightened, his step quickened slightly, and Victoria could see him mentally preparing for his shift. He stopped at the employee entrance and spent a moment looking up at the building, not with resentment or exhaustion, but with something that looked remarkably like gratitude. Victoria had expected to witness defeat, to see a man broken by circumstances. Instead, she observed 7 miles of quiet dignity, small acts of kindness, and an unwavering commitment to responsibility that put her own privileged perspective to shame. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because David's story is about to take a turn that will challenge everything you think you know about success and worth. The following Monday, Victoria made a decision that would ripple through Meridian Industries in ways no one could predict. She called David into her office, though he still didn't know she was the CEO. She had maintained her cover as a consultant, and David assumed he was in trouble for something. "David, I've been reviewing employee files, and I noticed something interesting about your work record," Victoria began, watching as David's face showed a flash of worry. In 8 months, you haven't missed a single shift. You haven't been late once. Your performance reviews are consistently excellent. How do you do it? David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I I need this job, ma'am. My daughter and we don't have many options. I know I'm not the smartest person here or the most qualified, but I can promise you that no one will work harder or care more about doing things right. Tell me about your daughter, Victoria said, genuinely curious about the child who seemed to motivate everything David did. David's entire demeanor transformed. His eyes lit up as he pulled out his phone, showing Victoria pictures of Sophie. She's 8, and she's the smartest person I know. She's in 2nd grade, but she reads at a 5th grade level. She wants to be a doctor someday, like the ones who tried to help her mama. His voice caught slightly on the last part, but he continued. She doesn't know how tight things are financially. I work nights, so I can be there when she gets home from school, help with homework, make dinner. She thinks I choose to walk to work because I like exercise. Victoria felt something shift inside her chest. What does she think you do here? She knows I help keep the building clean and safe. She says I'm a guardian angel for all the important people who work here during the day. David smiled. She made me a card that says, "My daddy makes the world shine." I keep it in my locker. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, during which Victoria learned about David's background as a musician, his wife's battle with cancer, the medical debt that had consumed their savings, and his daily choice between bus fare and groceries. What emerged was a portrait of a man who had redefined success not as personal gain, but as the ability to provide stability and hope for his daughter. When David left her office, Victoria sat in silence for a long time. She thought about her own definition of success, the stock options, the corner office, the private jet, and realized that by David's standards, she might actually be the poorer person. David had something she had been searching for her entire career, a sense of purpose that went beyond personal achievement. That evening, Victoria did something she hadn't done in years. She drove to Sophie's school to see David pick up his daughter. She watched from her car as the little girl ran to her father, her backpack bouncing, her face lit up with pure joy at seeing him. David swept her up in a hug, and Victoria could see him ask about her day, genuinely listening to her 8-year-old chatter about spelling tests and playground drama. "Daddy, why do you always smell like lemon?" Sophie asked, and Victoria saw David laugh. "Because I use lemon cleaner at work to make everything sparkle, just like you make my life sparkle." The simple exchange hit Victoria harder than any board meeting or profit report ever had. Here was a father who found poetry in industrial cleaning supplies, who turned a maintenance job into a metaphor for love. She realized she couldn't remember the last time she had asked her own daughter about her day with such genuine interest. Share in the comments if you've ever experienced this kind of selfless love, because what happens next will show you the true power of recognition. Victoria spent the next week conducting her own investigation into David's situation. What she discovered was a systematic failure that went far beyond one employee's transportation challenges. David was one of dozens of night shift workers who struggled with similar issues: inadequate public transportation, wages that barely covered basic necessities, and a company culture that treated these essential employees as invisible. The maintenance staff kept Meridian Industries running smoothly, yet they were excluded from company communications, had no pathway for advancement, and received none of the perks that day shift employees took for granted. They were the foundation upon which the company's success was built, yet they were treated as expendable. Victoria also learned that David had never applied for any of the company's hardship assistance programs, not because he didn't qualify, but because he didn't know they existed. The programs were buried in employee handbooks that were never distributed to night shift workers, and the applications were only available online, a challenge for someone who couldn't afford reliable internet access. The more Victoria learned, the more she realized that David's story wasn't just about one man's resilience. It was about a company, her company, that had lost sight of the people who made its success possible. But it was Sophie who ultimately inspired Victoria's next move. Through careful inquiries with the school counselor, done with appropriate privacy protections, Victoria learned that Sophie was indeed academically gifted, but she was also starting to show signs of stress. She had begun asking teachers about how much doctors earned, whether her daddy would always have to work at night, and if there were jobs that would let him afford a car. The 8-year-old was already carrying the weight of her family's financial struggles, trying to figure out how she could grow up fast enough to help her father. It was a burden no child should bear, and it crystallized Victoria's resolve to act. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Meridian Industries was preparing for its annual employee recognition ceremony, a lavish affair typically focused on celebrating top salespeople and executives. This year, Victoria decided to make some changes. She began by quietly investigating other employees like David, the security guards, the cafeteria workers, the maintenance staff who kept the company running behind the scenes. What she found was a collection of stories that were both heartbreaking and inspiring. Single mothers working multiple shifts to support their children, older employees who had been laid off from other companies and were grateful for any work, immigrants sending money home to families while building new lives in America. These were the people who ensured that the executives could focus on strategy and growth, yet they were rarely acknowledged, never celebrated, and often treated as interchangeable parts in the corporate machine. Victoria made a decision that would shock her executive team and potentially risk her own position. She was going to use the employee recognition ceremony to shine a spotlight on the invisible workforce that made Meridian Industries possible. And she was going to start with David Rodriguez. The night before the ceremony, Victoria found herself walking the same route David took every morning. 7 miles in designer heels gave her a new appreciation for what he accomplished daily in worn work boots. But more than the physical challenge, the walk gave her time to think about leadership, privilege, and the responsibility that came with power. She thought about her daughter Emma, who would inherit tremendous wealth but had never learned the value of work. She thought about Sophie Rodriguez, who understood sacrifice and determination at 8 years old, but might never have the opportunities that Emma took for granted. And she thought about David, who embodied every leadership principle she had studied in business school, yet would never be invited to sit at the executive table. By the time Victoria reached Meridian Industries that night, she had made a decision that would change not just David's life, but the entire culture of her company. Tomorrow's ceremony would be unlike anything the corporate world had seen before. The morning of the employee recognition ceremony, David arrived at work to find a note on his locker. It was from the HR department requesting that he attend a mandatory meeting at 10 a.m. in Conference Room A. His heart sank. Mandatory meetings were usually bad news, and he couldn't afford to lose this job. David spent his shift worrying about the meeting, running through everything he had done in recent weeks, wondering if someone had complained about his singing or if he had missed cleaning something important. When his shift ended at 8 a.m., he had 2 hours to kill before the meeting, so he used the time to walk to Sophie's school and have breakfast with her, a weekly tradition that was one of the few luxuries he allowed himself. "Daddy, you look worried," Sophie said as she ate her cereal in the school cafeteria. "Did something happen at work?" David forced a smile. "Just a meeting, Mija. Nothing for you to worry about." "Is it a good meeting or a scary meeting?" The question broke David's heart. His 8-year-old daughter had learned to categorize meetings as either threats or opportunities, a sophistication born from watching her father navigate financial instability. "I don't know yet," David said honestly, "but whatever happens, we'll figure it out together, okay?" Sophie nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Daddy, I wrote you a new song for when you're at work. Want to hear it?" David listened as his daughter sang a simple melody about guardian angels and shining lights, her young voice carrying the same natural musicality that had once defined his own dreams. In that moment, sitting in an elementary school cafeteria, David felt rich beyond measure. When he arrived at Conference Room A at 10 a.m., David was surprised to find it filled with people he didn't recognize, executives in expensive suits, people with tablets and notepads, and a woman at the head of the table who looked oddly familiar, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. "David, please sit down," the woman said, and David realized with shock that it was the consultant who had been asking him questions about his work. But something was different about her today. She carried herself with an authority that seemed far beyond what a consultant would possess. "David, I need to be honest with you about something," Victoria began. "I'm not a consultant. My name is Victoria Chen, and I'm the CEO of Meridian Industries." The room went silent as David processed this information. The woman he had shared his personal story with, the person he had shown pictures of Sophie to, was the head of the entire company. He felt his face flush with embarrassment and fear. "I'm sorry if I said anything inappropriate, Miss Chen. I didn't know who you were and—" "David, stop," Victoria interrupted gently. "You have nothing to apologize for. In fact, you've taught me more about leadership and dedication in our conversations than I learned in 4 years of business school." Victoria stood and addressed the room, though her words were clearly meant for David. "For the past month, I've been following the morning routine of David Rodriguez. Every day, he walks 7 miles to get to work because he can't afford a car. He's never been late, never missed a shift, and never complained about his circumstances. Along the way, he helps an elderly neighbor, assists a local business owner, and visits a memorial where he talks to his late wife about their daughter's progress in school." David felt tears beginning to form in his eyes, but Victoria wasn't finished. "David embodies every leadership principle we claim to value at Meridian Industries. He leads by example, takes personal responsibility, shows initiative, and demonstrates genuine care for his community. He's raising a brilliant daughter who thinks her daddy is a guardian angel because he helps keep our buildings safe and clean. And until this month, our company was treating him as invisible." Victoria turned directly to David. "That changes today. Would you have had the courage to do what Victoria did next? Share your thoughts in the comments, because this moment is about to redefine everything we think we know about corporate leadership." Victoria gestured to one of the executives who handed her a folder. "David, effective immediately, you're being promoted to Director of Facilities Management. This position comes with a 40% salary increase, health benefits that will eliminate your medical debt, and a company car." David stared at her in shock, unable to process what he was hearing. "But that's not all," Victoria continued. "Meridian Industries is establishing the Rodriguez Family Scholarship Fund, which will provide full educational support for Sophie through college, including the pre-med program she dreams about." David's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down his face as he tried to find words to express his gratitude. "Miss Chen, I don't—" "I can't. This is too much. I'm just a maintenance worker." "No, David, you're a leader who was working in maintenance. There's a significant difference." Victoria's voice was firm but kind. "You've been leading by example every single day, showing up, taking pride in your work, caring for your community, raising an exceptional daughter. We're not giving you charity, we're recognizing value that was already there." Victoria addressed the room of executives. "David's promotion is part of a larger initiative. We're restructuring our entire approach to employee recognition and advancement. Every person who works at Meridian Industries, regardless of their shift or department, will have access to professional development, educational assistance, and pathways for growth." She paused, letting the magnitude of the announcement settle. "We're also implementing a transportation assistance program for any employee who needs it. And we're establishing an employee advisory council that will include representatives from every department and shift." David wiped his eyes and tried to speak. "Miss Chen, I don't know how to thank you. Sophie, when Sophie finds out that she can become a doctor, that her daddy can afford to drive her to school—" "David," Victoria said softly, "you've been thanking us every day with your dedication and character. Now it's our turn to thank you." The meeting concluded with Victoria announcing that David's story would be the centerpiece of that afternoon's employee recognition ceremony. For the first time in Meridian Industries' history, the spotlight would shine on the people who worked behind the scenes to make success possible. As the executives filed out, Victoria remained behind with David. "I have one more request," she said. "My daughter Emma is home from boarding school this week. She's about Sophie's age, and she's been struggling to understand the value of hard work and gratitude. Would you and Sophie join us for dinner this weekend? I think the girls could learn from each other." David nodded, still overwhelmed by the morning's events. "Sophie would love that. She's always wanted to meet other kids who like to read." "And David, tonight when you go home to Sophie, you don't have to walk. Your new company car is being delivered this afternoon. The first thing I want you to do is drive to Sophie's school and pick her up. Let her see her daddy arrive in style." That afternoon, the employee recognition ceremony at Meridian Industries was unlike any corporate event the attendees had ever experienced. Instead of the usual focus on sales numbers and profit margins, Victoria used her opening remarks to tell David's story. "Leadership isn't defined by the size of your office or the number of people who report to you," Victoria told the packed auditorium. "It's defined by the example you set when no one is watching, by the kindness you show when there's no reward, and by the dedication you demonstrate when faced with impossible circumstances." She recounted David's 7-mile daily journey, his acts of kindness along the way, and his unwavering commitment to providing for his daughter. The room was completely silent as Victoria described watching David help strangers, talk to his late wife at a memorial garden, and arrive at work each day with gratitude instead of resentment. "David Rodriguez has been leading this company for 8 months, Victoria concluded. "We were just too blind to see it." When David was called to the stage, the standing ovation lasted for 5 full minutes. Employees from every department, executives, sales staff, administrative assistants, security guards, and maintenance workers rose to their feet to honor a man who had embodied the best of their company culture without ever being acknowledged for it. David's acceptance speech was brief but powerful. "I want to thank Miss Chen and Meridian Industries for seeing something in me that I didn't know was there, but mostly, I want to thank my daughter Sophie, who taught me that being someone's guardian angel isn't about having superpowers. It's about showing up every day and doing your best with whatever you have." As David left the stage, Victoria knew that this moment would ripple through Meridian Industries for years to come. Employees who had felt invisible suddenly felt seen. Managers began to look more carefully at the people working quietly in the background, and the company's culture began to shift toward recognizing contribution over position. But the most important moment was still to come. That evening, when David actually drove to Sophie's school for pickup, the little girl's reaction was everything Victoria had hoped it would be. "Daddy, you have a car! Does this mean you don't have to walk anymore?"
"That's right, Mija. No more walking." Sophie threw her arms around her father's neck. "Does this mean we're not poor anymore?" David held his daughter close, thinking about Victoria's words earlier that day. "We were never poor, Sophie. We just didn't have much money, but we've always been rich in the things that matter most." As they drove home together, their first car ride as a family since Maria's death, David told Sophie about his promotion, about the scholarship fund, and about the dinner invitation from Miss Chen's family. "Daddy, did you know this was going to happen?" "No, Mija. Sometimes good things happen when you least expect them, but they usually happen to people who keep doing good things even when nobody notices." Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing this wisdom. "Daddy, does this mean I can still become a doctor?" "It means you can become anything you want to be." That weekend, when the Rodriguez and Chen families sat down to dinner together,
something magical happened. Sophie and Emma, despite their vastly different backgrounds, connected over their shared love of books and their shared experience of having parents who worked long hours. Emma was fascinated by Sophie's resilience and maturity, while Sophie was amazed by Emma's access to educational resources she had only dreamed about. But the real connection was between the two fathers. David and Victoria's husband Michael, a successful attorney who had initially been skeptical of his wife's radical changes at Meridian Industries. Watching David interact with both girls, seeing his genuine interest in Emma's education and his patient guidance of Sophie's ambitions, Michael understood what Victoria had been trying to tell him about true leadership. "David," Michael said as the evening wound down, "Victoria tells me you used to perform music. Would you consider giving Emma some lessons? She's been taking piano for years. But she's never learned to play with the kind of heart I heard in your voice." And so began a friendship that would teach both families about the difference between success and significance, between wealth and richness, between achievement and fulfillment. 6 months later, at Meridian Industries' next quarterly board meeting, Victoria presented data that surprised even her most skeptical investors. Employee retention was at an all-time high, productivity had increased by 18%, and customer satisfaction scores had reached record levels. The changes that began with recognizing David Rodriguez had transformed the entire company culture. But the numbers, impressive as they were, didn't capture the real story. The real story was in the small moments. Maintenance workers who now felt empowered to suggest operational improvements. Administrative assistants who applied for management training programs. Security guards who were recognized for their role in keeping everyone safe. The real story was David Rodriguez, who had become not just a facilities director, but an informal mentor to employees throughout the company. His office door was always open, and his advice was sought by everyone from new hires to senior executives. He had a gift for helping people see their own worth, probably because he understood what it meant to feel invisible. And the real story was Sophie Rodriguez, who was thriving in her enhanced educational program, already talking about the medical school she wanted to attend, and writing songs about guardian angels who didn't need wings to fly. Victoria often thought about that first morning when she decided to follow David's 7-mile journey to work. She had expected to witness defeat and discover dignity. She had looked for problems and found solutions. She had sought to understand her company and instead learned about herself. The lesson wasn't just about corporate responsibility or employee recognition. It was about the danger of assumptions, the power of perspective, and the truth that real leadership often exists in places where we never think to look. As Victoria watched David work with their newest hires, teaching them not just the technical aspects of their jobs, but the pride and purpose that could transform any role into a calling, she realized that the best decision she had ever made as CEO wasn't about strategy or acquisitions or market positioning. It was the decision to follow a broken-down man on his morning walk and discover that he wasn't broken at all. He was just carrying more weight than anyone should have to bear alone. Today, David Rodriguez still arrives at Meridian Industries every morning at 6 a.m. But now he drives, and he arrives as a leader whose story has inspired thousands of people to look more carefully at the heroes walking quietly among them. His journey reminds us that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's who chooses to see your worth when the world has made you invisible. Success isn't always measured in stock options and corner offices. Sometimes it's measured in the example you set for an 8-year-old girl who thinks her daddy can make the whole world shine. And sometimes when we think we're following someone to understand their struggle, we discover that they've been leading us all along, showing us what dedication looks like, what sacrifice means, and what it truly means to be rich in the things that matter most. The next time you see someone walking when others are driving, working quietly while others take credit, or choosing kindness when the world offers them reasons for bitterness, remember David Rodriguez. Remember that leadership isn't about the position you hold, but the example you set. Remember that wealth isn't about what you own, but what you're willing to give. And remember that sometimes the person who needs recognition the most is the one who asks for it the least. What would you have done in Victoria's position? What guardian angels have you overlooked in your own life? Share your stories in the comments below, because everyone has a David Rodriguez in their world, someone whose quiet heroism deserves to be seen. Subscribe for more powerful stories like this, and click on the video on the screen to watch the next one with a twist so powerful you'll never forget it.